The handcuffs clicked shut, echoing louder than the sirens in the humid Georgia air. Deputy Bryce Caldwell thought he had stopped a career criminal, a man in a luxury SUV speeding through Oak Haven County with a sharp attitude. He had no idea the passenger in the back seat was Lieutenant General Marcus Whitaker, a three-star general overseeing logistics for the eastern seaboard. The misplaced sense of authority in Bryce's mind was about to meet the full weight of real power. The July heat pressed down on the asphalt, shimmering in waves of heat and humidity. For Marcus, the heat was trivial. He had endured deserts, jungles, and pressure-filled Pentagon briefings. Today was a simple drive in his silver Mercedes G-Wagon, meant to clear his mind before attending his son's airborne school graduation at Fort Benning. Marcus checked his speed, 54 in a 55 zone, calm and precise, a man who had lived a life of order and discipline. Meanwhile, Bryce sat hidden in the shade of an oak tree, sweating in his uniform and watching the road with boredom. The quota for the month was low, and the sheriff had been pressuring him about revenue. When the silver G-Wagon passed, Bryce saw wealth and status where he expected crime, misinterpreting the luxury SUV and the driver's presence as signs of illicit activity. He tailgated the Mercedes, intent on intimidation. Inside, Marcus noticed the aggressive approach. Tapping his brakes lightly, he signaled the officer, maintaining composure. Bryce, seeing this as defiance, flipped on the sirens. Marcus sighed and carefully pulled over, rolling down his windows and placing his hands on the wheel. Bryce approached with swagger, hand near his holster. He leaned into the tinted glass, asking, "Whose car is this, boy?" Marcus replied, calm and deep-voiced, identifying himself and stating he was reaching for his ID. Bryce laughed, demanding Marcus get out of the vehicle. Marcus refused, citing protocol. Bryce shoved, and Marcus stepped into the heat, taller and broader than the deputy. The confrontation escalated quickly. Marcus was handcuffed and moved to the cruiser, enduring rough treatment while remaining composed. Bryce ransacked the Mercedes, breaking into a government-issued hard case containing classified data. Marcus warned him of the violation and national security breach. The deputy ignored him, grabbing Marcus's phone. Marcus stayed calm, knowing the stakes and the chain of command. He initiated a secure call to the Pentagon, triggering an immediate response. Back at the sheriff's station, Sheriff Hayes entered, witnessing the chaos and realizing the severity. Marcus remained calm, assessing every threat. Within minutes, federal and military forces began mobilizing, alerted by Marcus's call. Black Hawks and tactical vehicles approached the small-town station, bringing armed soldiers to secure the situation. Bryce, overwhelmed, faced the consequence of his overreach. Marcus was vindicated, and the local authorities learned a harsh lesson in authority and respect. The operation escalated beyond local jurisdiction, and Marcus retained control of his property and security, demonstrating the consequences of misjudging a man of integrity and rank. Inside the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department, the tension reached a breaking point. Bryce Caldwell was confused, angry, and frightened, unable to comprehend the sudden escalation. Marcus Whitaker sat in the holding cell, hands cuffed but mind sharp, calmly assessing the situation. He watched as Bryce continued to tamper with the encrypted laptop case, unaware that every action was a federal violation. Marcus knew patience and procedure were his allies. Mabel, the booking sergeant, intervened quietly, providing him with a phone to reach the Pentagon. With measured precision, Marcus initiated a secure line, alerting the military to a code black scenario. Major Vance at the Pentagon responded instantly, coordinating a rapid reaction force. Within 30 minutes, helicopters and Humvees appeared outside the station, engines roaring and rotor wash tearing at the asphalt. The scene transformed from a small-town stop into a high-stakes federal operation. Marcus stood tall as the soldiers swept through, securing the building and detaining Bryce Caldwell. Sheriff Hayes realized the magnitude of the mistake, hands trembling, as the colonel assumed control under the National Security Act. Marcus retrieved his laptop, wallet, and phone, calmly asserting the rule of law. The deputy's arrogance and abuse of authority had led to a complete reversal of power. Outside, the storm had broken, rain soaking the small town as military precision overtook local incompetence. Marcus, composed and dignified, demonstrated that integrity and adherence to protocol outweighed reckless authority. By the time the helicopters departed, the message was clear. No individual, regardless of local status, could undermine national security. Bryce was removed from the scene in federal custody, leaving a shaken sheriff and a dismantled department behind. Marcus had maintained his composure, his actions a study in discipline, foresight, and the exercise of lawful power. The narrative of the day's events would ripple far beyond Oak Haven, signaling a precedent for accountability, oversight, and the consequences of prejudice combined with unchecked authority. Marcus's strategic use of protocol, communications, and calm authority exemplified the balance between measured response and immediate action in the face of injustice. The small town had witnessed a force that transcended local bias, leaving a lasting impact on everyone present. Even in the rain-soaked chaos, Marcus's presence was a beacon of order and integrity, reminding all that true authority commands respect through adherence to law, not intimidation. The consequences of Bryce's actions were only beginning, as federal intervention set a framework for systemic reform. The day concluded with Marcus securing his property and planning his next steps. Aware that justice had been served without a single unnecessary shot fired, but with every principle of accountability enforced. His son David would be none the wiser of the harrowing events that had unfolded mere hours before. His graduation untouched by the shadow of bureaucracy gone awry. The following morning at Fort Benning, the sun rose over the parade grounds with a crisp golden light that erased the humid haze from the previous day. Lieutenant General Marcus Whitaker, now in civilian clothes but exuding the authority of decades of service, took a seat in the VIP box. Soldiers lined up in perfect formation, the air electric with discipline and anticipation. Marcus's eyes were not on the ranks today, but searching for his son David among the troops. David stood rigid, unaware of the trials his father had faced the night before. Marcus reflected quietly on the ordeal, the illegal detainment, the mishandling of classified materials, and the overreach of local law enforcement. Beside him, Major General Harrison leaned in, commenting on David's posture and dedication. Marcus nodded, pride mixing with the weight of responsibility. He had ensured that justice had been served in Oak Haven, dismantling a corrupt sheriff's department and setting a precedent for accountability. The ceremony proceeded with precision, the order dismissed resonating across the grounds. Marcus descended the steps, the soldiers parting respectfully as he moved toward David. When they met, Marcus pulled him into a firm embrace, speaking softly but with conviction about courage, honor, and integrity. David, still in uniform, beamed, unaware of the national security crisis that had unfolded on his father's watch. The pair shared a quiet moment of triumph, a father proud not only of his son, but of the principles upheld against abuse of power. Meanwhile, in Oak Haven, Bryce Caldwell faced a far different morning. Stripped of authority, uniform, and freedom, he sat in solitary confinement in a federal facility in Atlanta. The reality of federal charges, potential decades in prison, and the exposure of a lifetime of misconduct hit him fully. FBI agents King and Peretti presented the evidence of repeated civil rights violations, demonstrating a pattern of abuse and corruption under Sheriff Hayes. Bryce's previous sense of impunity evaporated, replaced by fear and disbelief. Marcus's foresight and calculated actions had ensured that the consequences extended beyond immediate accountability, reshaping the justice landscape in Oak Haven. As he prepared for the graduation ceremony, Marcus was acutely aware that his intervention had protected countless others from arbitrary and prejudiced law enforcement practices. Justice had been restored, dignity preserved, and a powerful message delivered. Integrity and lawful authority outweigh abuse, prejudice, and unchecked power. The echoes of that day would resonate in Oak Haven County and beyond, a lasting testament to the impact of one man standing resolute against systemic corruption. By mid-morning, the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department had become a cautionary tale. Sheriff Warren Hayes and Deputy Bryce Caldwell faced the gravity of federal intervention. Marcus Whitaker's strategic foresight had not only ensured his personal safety, but had triggered a nationwide re-evaluation of local policing practices. In Atlanta, legal teams meticulously reviewed every case connected to Oak Haven, uncovering a web of profiling, unlawful stops, and asset seizures disproportionately affecting minority communities. Marcus, in the quiet of his suite at Fort Benning, reflected on the weight of authority and the responsibility it carried. He had acted not for vengeance, but for justice, ensuring the system upheld its constitutional promises. The dismantling of Oak Haven's department and the federal consent decree established a new framework for oversight and accountability, preventing future abuses. Marcus considered the ripple effects. Families who had been wrongfully penalized now had a chance at restitution. The community could begin to rebuild trust in law enforcement. Across the state, the story was a catalyst for policy reviews and discussions about civil rights enforcement. Marcus's measured response, balancing authority, tactical awareness, and legal channels, demonstrated the impact a disciplined, principled approach could have on systemic reform. His son, David, celebrated his graduation unaware of the nightmarish detour his father had navigated, a testament to Marcus's ability to separate personal emotion from mission. The contrast between Oak Haven and Fort Benning highlighted the spectrum of power, one rooted in integrity, the other in unchecked authority. Marcus's calm decisiveness became a model for leadership under crisis, reinforcing the lesson that true power lies in preparation, ethics, and steadfast adherence to law. Meanwhile, federal agents ensured that Bryce Caldwell and Sheriff Hayes would face the full consequences of their actions, making clear that the protection of citizens and lawful oversight was paramount. Justice, Marcus knew, was not about retribution, but about setting standards and safeguarding principles. His intervention secured both his son's future and the integrity of the justice system, a lasting legacy that would resonate far beyond a single county road in Georgia. Marcus understood that the day's events, though stressful and dangerous, had reaffirmed the potency of lawful action, measured courage, and moral clarity in a world where power could easily be abused. Even as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the parade grounds and the orderly formations of soldiers, Marcus's mind remained vigilant, knowing that the preservation of justice required constant attention, foresight, and unwavering commitment to principle. The aftermath in Oak Haven reverberated far beyond the county lines. Federal oversight teams combed through every aspect of law enforcement operations, cataloging abuses and instituting corrective measures. Marcus Whitaker, though physically removed from the chaos, remained a central figure, guiding the JAG Corps and civil rights attorneys to ensure accountability. Sheriff Hayes, facing the reality of dismantled authority, became a cautionary example of unchecked power. Deputy Caldwell, isolated and stripped of his badge, confronted the consequences of systemic and personal failures, understanding the cost of prejudice and overreach. Meanwhile, Marcus's personal life continued in parallel. He celebrated his son David's graduation, a moment of pride and relief, knowing the crisis had been managed without compromising his principles. The balance between personal accomplishment and duty was evident in every calculated decision he had made. Media coverage amplified the narrative, highlighting the critical importance of lawfulness and procedural compliance in local policing. Communities in Georgia and nationwide took notice, sparking discussions about civil rights, accountability, and reforms to prevent similar abuses. Marcus's handling of the Oak Haven incident became a blueprint for exercising authority with discipline and ethical foresight. The contrast between his measured actions and the reckless behavior of the local deputies underscored the consequences of failing to uphold the law responsibly. Marcus remained vigilant, understanding that institutional reform required constant oversight and commitment. The ripple effect of his intervention set new standards for police conduct, civil rights enforcement, and community trust, establishing Oak Haven as a historical case study in justice, accountability, and the effective use of authority in a democratic society. As the dust settled, Marcus reflected on the necessity of integrity, patience, and calculated action, reinforcing the lesson that true leadership protects not just individuals, but the principles that govern society itself. As weeks passed, Oak Haven began a slow recovery. The predatory ticketing system and unlawful practices were dismantled, replaced by state-supervised procedures. Residents who had long feared traffic stops now felt a tentative relief, watching deputies conduct themselves with professionalism. Marcus Whitaker continued consulting with federal authorities, ensuring that corrective measures were not temporary fixes but structural reforms. Meanwhile, David adjusted to life in the 82nd Airborne, aware that his father's actions had safeguarded countless civilians and set a precedent for ethical law enforcement. In the media, Marcus was hailed not for personal gain, but for principled action, demonstrating that one person's commitment to justice could catalyze systemic change. Oak Haven's courthouse and police records were audited, exposing decades of abuse, while the county faced restitution obligations and the public apology mandated by Marcus. The legal and ethical ramifications sent a clear message to law enforcement agencies across the nation. Accountability and adherence to civil rights are not optional. Marcus's philosophy, authority balanced with responsibility, became a reference point in training, conferences, and discussions about leadership in both military and civilian contexts. Every step, from his calm reaction during the illegal stop to the strategic call to the Pentagon, underscored a life guided by discipline, foresight, and moral clarity. Communities benefited not only from the immediate removal of corrupt practices, but from the long-term cultural shift that emphasized transparency, justice, and the protection of individual rights. Marcus's ability to turn a personal confrontation into a catalyst for reform reinforced the profound influence a principled individual can exert on a flawed system. Even in retirement, he reflected on the events with measured pride, knowing that integrity and careful action had preserved both life and the law. Months after the Oak Haven incident, Marcus Whitaker's actions continued to influence both the military and civilian communities. The Oak Haven Sheriff's Department remained dissolved under federal supervision, with a state-appointed oversight committee implementing new ethical and procedural standards. Citizens who had once feared routine stops now approached law enforcement with cautious trust. Recognizing the importance of accountability, Marcus monitored progress remotely, ensuring that the reforms were thorough and sustainable. David, now more experienced in the 82nd Airborne, often shared stories of his father's decisive and principled approach to crises, internalizing lessons on integrity and leadership. Marcus's interventions served as a template for addressing systemic abuses elsewhere, demonstrating that adherence to law, foresight, and ethical decision-making could rectify entrenched misconduct. The media continued to follow the Oak Haven story, illustrating the contrast between misuse of power and disciplined, lawful authority. Legal scholars debated the precedent Marcus had established, emphasizing the necessity of active oversight to prevent abuse and protect civil rights. In Oak Haven, restitution funds were distributed to the victims of past illegal seizures, restoring vehicles, finances, and a sense of justice to the community. 2. Marcus's involvement reinforced the principle that one person's commitment to integrity could catalyze profound change, ensuring that power was exercised responsibly and that the law served its intended purpose. The national attention on Oak Haven reshaped policy discussions in Georgia and beyond. Federal authorities documented every instance of misconduct, using Oak Haven as a case study for training law enforcement officers. Marcus Whitaker remained a quiet force, consulting behind the scenes to ensure that systemic reform endured and that civil rights protections were strengthened. He continued mentoring his son, David, who now carried both the pride of graduation and the understanding of the complexities of authority, accountability, and ethical decision-making. The legal outcomes from the Oak Haven case, including the dissolution of the Sheriff's Department and the class action settlements, became models for similar interventions nationwide. Media coverage highlighted Marcus's strategic and principled approach, underscoring that ethical leadership and procedural compliance are critical in maintaining public trust. Citizens across Georgia saw that justice could be restored and that corruption, even at a local level, was not immune from scrutiny. Marcus's foresight in managing the Oak Haven crisis set a benchmark for combining tactical awareness with moral clarity, demonstrating how integrity, careful planning, and adherence to law can transform a moment of conflict into a broader societal lesson. 1 year after the Oak Haven incident, the county had changed profoundly. Federal oversight ensured fair policing, and public trust slowly returned. Marcus Whitaker, now retired from active duty, reflected on the chain of events that had begun with a simple traffic stop. His disciplined, calm response had triggered systemic reform, demonstrating that principled action could correct institutional failures. David, thriving in the army, often discussed the lessons of integrity, foresight, and ethical decision-making with peers, inspired by his father's example. Oak Haven's streets were free from the predatory traffic enforcement that had dominated the past, and restitution funds restored dignity to the affected families. Marcus's intervention became a benchmark in ethical leadership, illustrating that respect for the law, combined with courage and strategic thinking, could enact meaningful change. The community began to heal, recognizing the balance between authority and accountability. Marcus and David occasionally visited Oak Haven to ensure the progress remained on track, reinforcing the lesson that integrity, once acted upon, could ripple far beyond a single moment, influencing policies, lives, and the future of civil rights protections. In Oak Haven, the long-term reforms were taking hold. Federal oversight ensured transparency in policing and reinforced civil rights protections. Citizens began engaging with law enforcement in a way they hadn't for years, fostering a community built on accountability. Marcus Whitaker, now fully retired from active duty, remained a guiding presence, consulting as needed to ensure the ethical standards he had helped enforce were maintained. David, proud of his father and his own service, internalized the lessons of integrity and strategic leadership, becoming a model of ethical decision-making in his own right. Media coverage continued to highlight Oak Haven as an example of successful intervention and reform. Across the state, other counties studied the case, implementing preventative measures to avoid similar abuses. The ripple effects of Marcus's actions were felt in both policy and cultural awareness, emphasizing that lawful, principled authority is far more powerful than unchecked force. Marcus's calm, disciplined response to crisis demonstrated that integrity combined with tactical intelligence could create systemic change without violence, setting a precedent for generations of leaders to come. The community had been restored, victims compensated, and the lesson clear: ethical action, foresight, and adherence to law are the foundation of a just society. As months turned into a year, the Oak Haven reforms became institutionalized. Federal oversight maintained a presence in the county, ensuring compliance with civil rights and ethical policing standards. Residents began to regain trust, participating in community meetings and offering feedback on law enforcement practices. Marcus Whitaker, now retired and free from active duty, continued to advise on civil rights and organizational reform, ensuring the principles he had fought for endured. David's military career flourished, shaped in part by witnessing his father's strategic and principled approach to authority. Across Georgia, law enforcement agencies studied Oak Haven as a model of intervention and reform, recognizing that accountability and ethical leadership could prevent abuses of power. The ripple effects of Marcus's actions continued to influence both policy and public perception, reinforcing that lawful, measured responses are often more powerful than brute force. Communities saw tangible benefits: restitution to victims, restored property, and a renewed commitment to fairness. The story of Oak Haven became a case study in how integrity, foresight, and adherence to legal and moral principles could transform a crisis into lasting systemic change. Marcus's actions, guided by patience, discipline, and moral clarity, set a benchmark for leadership, demonstrating the enduring power of ethical decision-making and the importance of upholding justice even in the face of arrogance and abuse. In Atlanta, the ripple effects of the Oak Haven case continued to influence national discussions on civil rights and police accountability. Federal oversight and the legal precedent established by Marcus Whitaker's intervention became a model for other counties facing similar issues. Marcus, though retired, remained actively engaged behind the scenes, advising on reforms and ensuring that the lessons of Oak Haven endured. David, now more experienced in the military, carried the knowledge of ethical leadership into his own training and mentorship, reinforcing the importance of integrity and strategic thinking. Oak Haven residents witnessed a transformed law enforcement culture. Transparency, fairness, and accountability replaced fear and intimidation. The story of Marcus Whitaker's decisive, lawful, and principled action served as an educational example for law enforcement officers, policymakers, and the public alike. The balance between authority and responsibility had been demonstrated, showing that courage, foresight, and adherence to the law can rectify systemic failures and protect communities from abuse. By the following spring, Oak Haven had become a symbol of accountability. The class action settlements had restored property, finances, and dignity to the affected families. Federal oversight ensured sustainable reform, with deputies now trained in civil rights, procedural law, and ethical engagement. Marcus Whitaker, retired but vigilant, continued consulting behind the scenes, ensuring that the lessons learned would prevent future abuses. David's growth as an Army officer mirrored the values his father exemplified: integrity, patience, and strategic foresight. Media outlets and legal scholars referenced Oak Haven as a case study in the power of lawful intervention, illustrating how a principled individual could correct systemic corruption. Communities across the state and nation observed the ripple effects, prompting evaluations and reforms in local policing practices. The story underscored the enduring impact of disciplined, ethical leadership in protecting both civil rights and community trust. Marcus's decisive actions during the Oak Haven incident demonstrated that true authority arises from lawfulness, foresight, and moral clarity, leaving a legacy that reshaped perceptions of power and accountability in law enforcement. Oak Haven's transformation continued over the next months. The federal consent decree enforced structural reforms in law enforcement, emphasizing ethical conduct, transparency, and accountability. Community engagement increased, with residents participating in oversight committees and public forums, restoring a sense of trust in local governance. Marcus Whitaker, retired but ever vigilant, advised on these reforms, ensuring that procedural integrity and civil rights remained central to policing. David, now fully integrated into the Army, often reflected on his father's actions, internalizing the principles of integrity, foresight, and responsible leadership. Media coverage and legal analyses continued to highlight the case, presenting Oak Haven as a model for ethical intervention and systemic change. Marcus's decisive actions not only corrected the immediate abuses, but also set a precedent for addressing misconduct in other jurisdictions, demonstrating that lawful, strategic, and principled responses could rectify entrenched corruption. The community regained its dignity, the victims were compensated, and the lesson was clear. True authority depends on adherence to law, ethical decision-making, and the courage to act decisively when confronted with abuse of power. The final chapter of Oak Haven's transformation unfolded with both closure and reflection. Marcus Whitaker and David drove along Route 27 in a silver Mercedes G-Wagon, the same road where the previous summer's chaos had erupted. The air was warm, cicadas humming, and the oak tree by Miller's Creek still stood sentinel. Marcus paused at the shoulder, reflecting on the journey, from illegal detainment and tampering with classified materials to systemic reform and justice restored. He rolled down the window, feeling the familiar heat and humidity, now symbolic of endurance and resilience. David glanced at his father, sensing the gravity of the moment. Marcus retrieved his phone, looking at a new photo of him and David fishing, smiling, embodying the peace that justice and integrity had brought. The rage and frustration from the previous year had dissipated, replaced by satisfaction and quiet triumph. Marcus started the engine, the G-Wagon's twin turbo humming a song of freedom and accountability. He pressed the accelerator, the vehicle moving smoothly toward the horizon. Turning to David, he said with a calm smile, "Remember the question Deputy Caldwell asked?" David shook his head. "Whose car is this?" Marcus chuckled, the sound resonant with finality. "It's mine," he said. They drove off into the sunset, leaving behind the shadows of Oak Haven, a town now forever changed by the courage, discipline, and integrity of one man who refused to compromise justice. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.